Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Top Talk webinar. Hi, Nigel. I know you're in the wings. How are you doing?
I am here, Jay. Thank you very much.
Excellent. That's really good. Nigel, we do have some new faces as well as some familiar ones online with us tonight. So before we get started, please just tell everybody a little bit about you, how you sort of got into photography and your journey into the landscape photography that you love.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Nigel Forster. I'm a landscape photographer based near Brecon. Been involved in photography for, originally since the 1980s, but in digital photography since quite recently, actually, since about 2009. I do tourism and commercial work, but my main work is teaching photography. Teach groups, individuals throughout South and West Wales, and I'm currently advertising workshops in England and Scotland at the moment. That's probably, as an introduction, probably, all people need to know, I would imagine, Jay.
Excellent, brilliant. This has been a bit of a series.
Everything else will become clear as I talk through it.
Absolutely. So we've been running this as a bit of a series in landscape photography. So we've been visiting this over the last few months there, Nigel. So I'll send you the screen over. But Nigel, it's all yours, pal.
Thank you very much, Jay. Hi, everybody. As you can tell from the title, this one in the series is called Light, Weather and Seasons in Landscape Photography. It is, as Jay's probably seen from the advance file I've given to him, it's quite a long one. So let's see how that one goes. For anybody who's involved in landscape photography, the weather and the seasons is quite fundamental. I just want to give you a few ideas as to how what I've learned about weather forecasting, a little bit of an amateur weather forecaster, and how I use that in sort of planning my photography and gauging what kind of situations I'm going to face when I'm out with my camera. As always with these, what I'll do is to divide it into chunks. Into various sections, and I'll invite questions as we pass through. What Jay did last week perhaps more was to collect a few questions at the end, but let's see how that goes. So let's hope that's good, it carries on. So these are the main headings. Primarily about I say weather and its impact on photography. There's a little bit on seasonal change as well, and I've picked out a couple of particular types of weather which I'm particularly keen on, the one particularly on stormy weather and high contrast light, which I use a lot in my photography. You might prefer other styles of photography, but so that's what I've dedicated a little bit more time to. Okay, so understanding weather patterns. Well, as I mentioned, it affects light and light photography in many ways. Now, what style of photography are you looking for? Misty effects, stormy skies. If you work for clients, what kind of image do they want? Do they want blue skies with a few fluffy clouds? Those kind of things. Now, weather is very important for that. So it'll be very important in terms of the type of imagery you get. The important thing about weather is that, as we all know, it's very, very unpredictable, and what you're planning to get might not necessarily be the case. So do use weather forecasting as a guide, not an absolute, because if you do treat it as an absolute, what you'll tend to end up doing is probably going out in very specific conditions and actually not making use of a whole range of other opportunities. So, day and time of year. Well, a number of things affect light and colour and the landscape. The time of day, we all know clearly as the sun comes up and goes down, the light quality changes, the light colouring changes, and we get particularly used to using what we call the golden hour for photographing, for landscape photography. But hopefully many of these examples, and in fact in previous webinars I've done, I've demonstrated that don't be limited to early and late, because at all times of day you can get a variety of conditions. Time of year. The light changes throughout the seasons, particularly in that kind of luminosity in terms of colour, and I've got a few examples there. And obviously type of weather, whether you've got what I'm going to go on to cyclonic, anticyclonic kind of weather patterns which produce certain types of light for photography. So moving on to the weather systems. This is probably my preferred kind of weather. The weather chart is a little bit old. Those of you who get used to looking at the weather, they do look a little bit different these days. But essentially, what you're looking at is a low-pressure weather system with frontal rain. That happens to be a cold front, and that produces cold air behind, showery air behind, as you can tell by what's called the isobars, which are those little lines. They're very close together. That produces strong winds. Now, typically, that kind of weather produces rain or showers. It produces strong contrasty light. Typically, the wind comes from the southwest, which in our part of the world produces very clear light. So this is my preferred kind of photography. Changing weather, rapidly changing, a variety of photographic situations. You never know quite what's going to happen next, but also you get heavy rain as well with this kind of weather. And the type of weather in part depends on, this is called a low pressure system, partly depends on how low the pressure is. The lower the pressure, the stronger the winds. That particular one actually is not massively low. 1,000 millibars. It's about. You can get much lower than that. So the lower it is, the stronger the winds are, and the more the weather changes. Time of year also comes into it as well, and I'll explain a bit more about that at the moment. So that's very much the kind of weather that I look for in my photography because of the movement, the change, and the constant uncertainty, but be prepared to get wet in it as well. So what's it useful for? Well, a few visual examples here. Dramatic skies, absolutely. You can tell from the bottom one there, and I've shown you a few examples of this before. Backlighting, sun coming with pretty clouds. It's quite dramatic kind of light. Produces waves in the sea. The wind and the tides produce those kind of effects. Grey skies produce very strong colours, for example, in the poppy image above there. So those kind of situations produce are very good for this kind of photography. Finally, and I've got a bit more about this in a minute, waterfalls. Flat light is good for waterfalls as well, and obviously there's a fair amount of rain around as well in that particular waterfall. So these kind of things this situation is very good for a wide variety of photographic opportunities. The other very broad weather type is anticyclonic or high pressure weather system. So this is much more static. You don't get you don't get rain, you don't get the cloud movement, you don't get the wind. It's much more still and unchanging. Now, this can be a bit more tricky because, as I mentioned, winds are lighter. Air is often not as clear because typically it originates from the east as opposed to the west. So generally it produces much more still air, which can lead to, at the extreme end, for example, Mediterranean weather. Sun comes up, blue sky, sun goes down. So it's great if you want whitewashed buildings against a blue sky, but not much else happens. So this can be a bit tricky, but it does have opportunities. So just a few examples here. Mists at dawn. Very still air where you want reflections in water. Frosts in winter because temperatures drop quite significantly in high pressure weather systems. But if you get to later in the day, as in the example here, can be quite featureless, where you get quite hazy light. It hasn't generally got the clarity of the light that you get with a low pressure weather system, and generally unchanging skies. So basically you don't get the light and shade and backlighting effect that I tend to look for. I should point out, when we talk about the weather, we always talk about generalities because there are always exceptions. The weather can always surprise you. So as we go through this, I'm going to be talking very much about the general situation, but don't see it as absolutely cast in stone because there's many opportunities, many situations in which weather can surprise you. So a bit of an overview here of light and the seasons, and I'm going to go back to more about the weather in a moment. So I'm just going to very quickly give you an overview of the different kind of light that you tend to get throughout the seasons. So winter light, cool, clear, quite bluish in character. except where you get the sun close to the horizon, particularly when it reflects on snow, can be quite an orange effect. The light on the whole tends to be quite weak though, so you don't get a luminosity and the striking effects that you can get, particularly in the spring and to some extent in the autumn. So it can have a general feeling of not quite having that sort of dramatic effect. A lot of my photography in the winter tends to be when the sun is higher in the sky, particularly unsettled weather, because you still get the changing weather, you get the backlighting. As the sun drops towards the horizon, good example actually being the one with the horse and the picture below. The sun's quite low, but it's quite weak and it doesn't really have a very particularly strong effect, but again, it can always surprise you. As you get towards spring, it's got a very different character, much stronger, very clear, very bright. There's actually nothing that can beat spring light on a clear day because it's got an absolute stunning clarity at its best. As it gets towards what we call the golden hour, you'll find on a clear day, again relating to whether it's cyclonic or anticyclonic weather, you'll get particularly in cyclonic weather, incredible lighting, dramatic lighting. So it's something to look for. And I'm going to give you one or two examples when this, in a minute where this is particularly clear. So you'll find the light is still quite cool. It almost matches, you'll notice spring colours, lots of light colours, blues, yellows, greens. That's the characteristic of the landscape. And the light almost seems to match that because it's got an incredible clarity to it. Summer light, you can instantly see the difference here. It's not as clear, it hasn't got that sharpness, even on a clear day in the summer. And July probably is the one month I kind of tend to put my camera away, and it is actually the month that I don't run group workshops at all, because two reasons. The days are incredibly long, and you know, it's too much to expect people often to get up at a time of day when perhaps you want to be around. But also, even when it is clear, even when you've got cyclonic weather, even when it is coming from the southwest and all those kind of things you look for, it hasn't got the clarity and sharpness that you tend to get at other times of year. These are actually four very good examples that potentially the light actually was very good. Right direction, changeable weather, stormy skies, these kind of effects, but as you can tell, they have nothing like the clarity of those kind of pictures. Those were those generally taken between March and May, those taken in July, August. Big difference between the two. So as we move on towards autumn, clarity comes back, and you can tell the very strong difference in the colouring and style of imagery in the autumn compared to the summer. The colours are much more towards browns and ochres, and again the light is warmer, typically warmer than you'll get in spring. In fact, I took the one on the bottom right just this week. It's overlooking Llangorse, Llangorse and Llangorse Lake and the Brecon Beacons, and so we're back to kind of very unsettled, very clear light, which, as I said, going back to summer, you don't get at all. So this time of year is a great time of year. And while I'm picking up on that, it's probably worth, if you can, take advantage of that kind of weather while you can, because it doesn't last. Today has been flat again, essentially not much movement. The wind has dropped. So the light hasn't had anything like the clarity. The picture on the bottom right was taken 2 days ago. Absolutely crystal clear, and the kind of situation where you, as a landscape photographer, really want to go out with your camera. It was windy. It was very clear light, but it's now settled down, and the pressure has risen. We're now more in a high pressure system, and anyone who's been out today, not much cloud movement, not much contrast in the sky, and that's what tends to happen. I wouldn't expect tomorrow to be any different. So we're now into a more settled spell of weather. Opportunities tend to have diminished. So make use of that kind of light. If you're keen on landscape photography, make use of that kind of light when you can. Bit of a break there, Jay. Have I had any questions?
A handful, but they've been more general. But going back to the first part, and I know obviously you said that you were going to talk about the weather again when you were looking, you were saying, look at the forecast. What typically, and this is obviously going to be varied for also the type of the year, but if you were looking for say you were hoping to go out tomorrow or hopefully go out the next couple of days, what typically would you be looking for in a wet weather forecast to give you a kind of inclination that tomorrow could be good for the photography? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat it, Jay? Sorry,
Yeah.
you lost me there.
Sorry. So the gist I'm getting from the question was, because we were talking about reading the weather forecast in advance, if you like, what are the sort of key signs? It's going to be difficult for the different seasons, but say for today, what would you be looking for? Would you be looking for possibly good skies after a storm, or that the weather's going to be?
It really depends on. I mentioned right at the beginning. It really depends on what kind of photograph you're interested in getting. Are you looking for? Are you going to go down to a local reservoir and get a perfect reflection at dawn? Are you hoping to get mist on the ground? Or are you hoping to get strong contrasting dark skies? So the kind of, or looking at the examples I've got in front of me here, are you looking for sunshine and fair weather clouds? Now the type of pictures that I've got in front of me here are very much the kind of pictures that the tourism market wants, basically, because it shows literally everything in a good light. It doesn't show the fact that when you come to visit a place, it's going to be dark skies and potentially pouring with rain. So, but equally for my own portfolio, I will probably be ideally looking for pictures which suit the style of photography which I'm keen on, which is more of the mood and dramatic light kind of photography. So it very much depends on what you're looking for.
So are there just top tips to look out for on the weather? So if you want it, well, obviously clear skies should be fairly easy to read, but is it a bit of a given that, if you've had a particularly heavy stormy night, then the clouds should be pretty good the following day? Or I've
got a section on that at the end, which I'm going to talk about particular weather systems, the particular weather types and what to look for within them. But I'll go back to the basic premise that you are fundamentally looking at anticyclonic high pressure systems or cyclonic low pressure systems. Fundamentally, that is the difference between the two. Our two very basic weather types are just those. So they are the starting point of what to look for. But obviously within that, there's quite a lot of detail.
Excellent. Well, the rest of the questions I've got are sort of the generic ones that we'll hang on to for now, so you carry on.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Jay. Okay, so the section is on photographing the sky and clouds. And I've moved away a little bit from the seasons here and moving back towards particular weather types. And clouds, or not, they have certain effects. There are clouds because of the light effects they achieve, and I've got more on that in a minute. And there are clouds because they're part of the content of the picture. Now these are very much part of the content of the picture. So they are there because they have blue sky, you have some clouds, they're fair weather clouds. They don't really have an effect on, apart from illuminating the whole foreground, they don't have any particular other function than being part of the content of the picture. As I've mentioned, these are typically popular with effectively with customers who want to have a place that they know taken on a nice bright sunny day, something to lighten the mood if you like, or within tourism, or perhaps, for example, local authority, Visit Wales for example, people like that who will want to demonstrate, show off places in the best light. So that's a primary use of taking this kind of picture. Typically high pressure weather systems, or low pressure, perhaps with passing it with the odd shower. So these can be, you can very much get skies like this on with a day which is largely bright with the odd shower. So images without clouds. Now they do absolutely have their uses. They make for very simple compositions where in fact having a clear blue sky, I know the one with the sunburst effect isn't quite clear, it's got a bit of white above it, the other three are clear. They are whether because of the content of the picture or the particular mood of the mood they evoke, then you wouldn't necessarily want clouds within the picture. So these very much part of the composition here is about the blue, the colour, or in 3 cases, the blueness of the sky. Typically, but not always, these will be taken in high pressure weather systems in pretty much settled weather. However, occasionally, what you can get, particularly when you get convective weather with unstable air, clouds can build up very quickly. So occasionally you'll get this as a dawn light, but within an hour clouds will have built up and showers are forming. That can be very interesting as a weather type, but more often than not, it's fair to say a clear, absolutely clear blue sky will happen after a clear night, and it'll happen in high pressure settled air, what we call anticyclonic weather systems. These uniform skies, so this could happen in all kind of weather. So we've got a sunrise taken, I think, the following day, the one with the power station, the following day was clear blue sky all day. Conversely, a grey sky, completely different kind of weather, or fog and mist. So all these things are actually got there is a particular character to the sky here, and there is a variety of weather systems. And what I want to get across to you is that there are a whole variety of weather situations that can produce a completely different style of image. As I mentioned, the one at St Paul's Cathedral was taken in dense fog, but it's just picked out the shapes of the cathedral and the people walking on the bridge. On that note, and it's something worth repeating that I mentioned yesterday, good example being the one on the bottom right, that was taken in mist with the sun coming up. Mist simplifies images, so it can be a very effective type of weather within photography. There's a lot of detail behind that tower, where the one on the picture on the bottom right, and the dam wall, but obviously the mist obscures it. Typically, that weather will happen within a high pressure weather system after a cool night. So that's when we get, and it can settle quite a lot in valleys as well. I'll come onto that in a little bit more detail. Sometimes you want to exclude the sky. So when the sky perhaps has little interest, or in fact detracts from the picture. With all these, if I included the sky, your attention will be focused on the sky when actually the image is absolutely nothing to do with it. So, but you can tell within all of these, and particularly the one on the bottom right, the light from the sky had an effect on the style of the image. So these are more about shape and form and pattern rather than created by the weather, rather than having the sky in the image. I've got a few more examples here. I think you'll have to excuse me if I have. Again, these are, the sky is included, whether it's backlit, whether it's lit by sunshine from the side. I've excluded the sky from all these because they are more about the shape, the pattern, the form, and the lighting. So that the weather has got an effect on this, but the sky isn't an element of it. A couple on types of cloud. I'm just going to do 2 here without going into too much detail. There are anyone who's done A-level or a degree in or anything in meteorology knows there's a whole numerous different type of cloud that produces different kinds of, there's a consequence of different kind of weather systems. Just going to cover a couple here. Cirrus, high-level, light cloud. Couple of generalizations, generally typical of either high-pressure weather systems, settled weather, or an approaching front, which is quite a long way off. Can be best early or late, tends on the whole to produce quite good sunrises and sunsets, but it does depend on the time of year. Now, this time of year is exceptional. Anybody who's been out recently will have noticed quite a few fantastic, particularly sunsets. September, October is probably the best time of year for colour in sunrise and sunsets. On the whole, tends to diminish from November onwards and come back in March. and then that couple of March and April also is very good. Again, as with most things, and I'm going to repeat this time and time again, a generalization, because the weather can always surprise you, and suddenly you'll find, there's a fantastic dramatic sunset at any time of year. But I say in terms of generalities, so those are cirrus clouds and cumulus clouds, completely opposite, unsettled weather, cyclonic air, rapidly changing, very dark, weather changes very, very quickly, and very changing light. So much more mood, much more drama, excellent both in colour and in black and white, do be prepared for this kind of weather. As you can tell, none of these were taken on dry days. Be prepared for yourself, particularly if you're high up and exposed. Make sure you got the right clothing and footwear, but also be prepared for your camera. An umbrella is probably the biggest single useful thing you can take with you in this kind of weather. Very difficult to keep the rain off, and almost certainly when you're out in this kind of weather, you'll get persistent rain, or hopefully passing showers, because then you get the light and shadow effect. I say all these were taken in this kind of weather. A few more again in black and white. This kind of it produces an incredible amount of contrast in the sky, and it works very well in black and white. As you can tell, these are colour, these are black and white, and the tonal variation of in the sky works exceptionally well in black and white. On this section, this is the type of weather which is probably my favourite, and I think I mentioned this last week, that I tend to go for. It's the kind of weather that gets me out with the camera. The rest of it I can take or leave. I can, if it's a misty morning, or if the weather's looking settled, I might not try too hard. But if I see a forecast and I'm around for this kind of light, then I'll try to be out with my camera. So what does it do? Well, as I said, it's the cyclonic weather, very high contrast, can occur all year round, although, as I've shown you before, tends not to be as strong in summer, and typically doesn't occur as often in summer. Winds are less in the summer. Even when you get this kind of weather, you don't tend to get the movement, because you don't get the winds, and you don't therefore get the clouds moving across and changing the sky quite as quickly as you do at other times of year. But it is very much a kind of sky, a kind of light that I tend to look for. It also, and I've got a separate slide on this, so I'll leave that for a moment. Shafts of sunlight. This kind of weather produces this kind of effect, and we've all seen it. And how often have you been out with your camera and you've seen this wonderful lighting situation, and by the time you've stopped the car, walked back to the spot, got your camera out, of course the lighting situation's gone and you can virtually never recover it. So you do have to be prepared for this kind of light, and ready to take an opportunity when it arises. That shot actually of the top left hand side taken in Snowdonia, within half an hour all those clouds are gone and it was totally clear sky. They'd absolutely evaporated. It can of course go the other way, and often does, where the cloud closes in and it's gone just as quickly. So those moments only happen very quickly, and I would guess for one of those shots 10 times I'll go out and won't get that kind of effect. So it's very much, you've got to be persistent, I would say. Sun also needs elevation in the sky to bring light down from above, the other opposite, the other situation where the light's coming down from below, the one on the top right, taken at St David's in Pembrokeshire, is when the sun's close to the horizon. But more typically, you've got the sun coming down from above. So again, situation taken in low pressure, in changeable weather. One other note there, as I've mentioned, the bullet point at the bottom, use of an ND graduated filter, absolutely essential for this kind of shot. Cameras cannot cope with the foreground and sky due to when the sky is that much brighter than the foreground, so the use of a graduated filter is essential for those. Do you use black and white or colour as I've mentioned, this kind of sky is very effective in both. This particular picture I probably refer in black and white, I think, to the colour example. The colour generally doesn't really add much to the mood or style of the picture. But I've got other examples where I've actually shot them in colour, and I've showed you one or two previously, where the greens are very strong, where the colour saturation is very strong. With this particular one, the colours are quite weak, they're quite unsaturated, and I feel as though they probably detract a little bit from the picture. This one was taken about 4 hours before sunset, so it's quite a way up in the sky, but sending cascades of light down to the mountains. And in mountain photography, generally you need the elevation. If the sun comes too low, you don't really get the effect. It's not as effective. This is just an example. This is only one of the spots I often take customers to because it's very accessible. You can park the car and wait. Just a few examples of waiting your moment when you get to a spot in changing light. First one, too early, where the light hasn't really hit the landscape. The middle one, I think, is the best. It captured, I've got about 20 of these shots. I just constantly took a whole series of shots as the light changed. And this one I like because it lights up the middle ground, the foreground's dark and the background's dark, so it draws the eye towards the main focus of the picture. The one on the bottom, it's all evened out. So the sun's partly obscured and it's lighting up the landscape very evenly. Hasn't anything like got the drama in the shot. So look at timing and be persistent. So if you can find a spot, this one, as I mentioned, is very easy because you can park the car and wait. Many of the others, of course, you're up on a mountainside and potentially getting wet. Here, you can just wait the moment, which makes life much easier. So do get to a spot, anticipate the weather. You basically sunshine and showers, typical kind of weather for this kind of situation. It will change in a moment. Another one where I've got changing light. This one's taken up on just off the Isle of Skye, looking back towards the Scottish mainland. Just a series of pictures that shows how the light changes as the clouds move. It's very unpredictable. First thing to say about this, you don't quite know what's going to happen with these. Sometimes it can be annoyingly not quite happen, but just shows you the different effects as the sun goes across. Generally, you don't really want too much of a gap in the clouds because it'll add to an overall illumination. But as sun moves across to the one on the bottom right, you'll see it covers the sun and sends the cascades of light going down. If they're coming from the side, you're looking for the shafts of light going into the main point of the picture, which effectively, of course, is the landscape feature, the mountain in this regard. So just an example of where you get to a spot and just look at what the light's going to do. And as I mentioned, it's very hit and miss. One location I go to around here for this kind of shot is the Seven Bridges. They're very good for this kind of effect. Again, you've got the structure, you've got features, you don't quite know what's going to happen. Excuse me. A couple of other examples of changing light where the light has caught an important part of the picture. So again, with these, I waited a fair time just to see what the light was going to do. With the top one, Llyn van Fach in the Brecon Beacons, it's just caught the edge of the bank and the foreground. But left the rest very dark. A minute later, the sun was in the water, the sun was on the foreground. I didn't want that. Catching a key part of the picture is very, very important. In the lower example, it isn't so much the clouds that's created the effect, although the clouds are quite dark. It's actually the landform that's caused the light coming through into the central part of the picture. You'll notice within both these examples, as in the previous one, that one there. The light is on the central part of the picture where the top of the picture is dark, the bottom of the picture is dark, and the central part of the picture catches the eye. It's where I tend to have most of the light content in my picture. Again, these are all pictures taken on unsettled weather, showery or rainy weather, where you get sunshine and showers. Other examples, using changing light to capture a particular feature, whether it's a building, whether it's a tower or a rock feature or a mountain. I've waited for the sunlight to catch a particular part of the picture for dramatic effect. One thing that this picture reminds me of, actually, somebody mentioned last week that a number of the pictures look quite saturated and quite colourful. They do. These look more saturated and colourful than on my originals. I think it's probably something to do with the transfer of the imagery from JPEG to PowerPoint that's causing it. So if some of these do look a little bit bright and a bit contrasty, that is the reason why I've checked them against the original. So that's an answer to a person who asked the question right at the end of last week, that they actually do look very colourful. The originals actually don't look. I'm looking at the one on the top right, and actually it does look oversaturated, so do bear that in mind. Yeah, just a few examples. Key point about this, the sun on the whole in these kind of pictures is out very, very briefly. It comes and goes within moments, and often when you've missed a chance, it doesn't happen again. So be prepared. Don't expect to run towards the spot with the camera and hope to get the situation, because you probably will miss it. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's rather like being in a car and catching something wonderful, and you just can't get it by the time you've got back to the spot. It's just too late. Right, I've reached another break, Jay. Have you had any other questions?
We do have a couple here. Again, we've got some generic ones that I'll hang on to. Actually, most of them are pretty generic. Oh, somebody asked. Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. Any guide on how, let me just make sure I read this right for you. Any guides on when the possibility of rolling clouds will develop over nears and hills? So telltale signs for rolling clouds that came in when you were talking about them.
They're coming up over mountains. Yeah, mountains have their own climate. But equally, it's always going to be unstable air. While mountains actually, the actual shape of the mountains can cause warm air to rise. So warm air rising produces clouds as it condenses higher up, as it cools. So that's why you get clouds over mountains that you don't necessarily get at ground level. So the very fact that you've got the shape of the mountain pushing air up will create clouds over the mountains in themselves. Now, but equally, that will be more intense in unstable air. So typically, you will get that more often in low pressure weather systems, often where you've got a front that's passed through and you've got shower clouds developing. Because what that will happen, you've got sunshine and showers coming through a front, and it's the unstable air behind it. So typically, it will happen more with more certainty in cyclonic weather, where you've got unstable air, than in settled weather, where effectively you might just end up with hazy flat skies. But within that, there's a lot of variations, and the fact is that mountains produce their own climate because they push warm air upwards and cool it. That produces clouds.
Brilliant. Nigel, most of the ones I've got left still for you are generic, and I'm quite keen that we sort of get through the presentation. So guys, we'll definitely ask Nigel your questions, but for the core of you that have sort of joined us tonight to get through the weather and the season stuff, let's do that first, and then we'll do the generic landscape questions at the end, Nigel.
Okay. Right. Photography in specific types of weather. I'm going to go through this. I'm in danger of running out of time here. I do want to get to the end, so I'll run through these a little bit more quickly. Rain or cloudy days. Don't dismiss these because they are very effective for photography. The number of photographers who think it has to have sunshine, has to have light on the landscape to be able to produce effective landscapes. It certainly doesn't. When you've got clear light and cloudy days, exceptional for black and white, exceptional when you've got, because you've got a lot of tones, and a lot of the black and white examples I showed you earlier on were all taken in very dark, intense clouds. Very good for color saturation when you have the time of year like this time of year, when you've got very strong colors like autumn colors or spring colors, or indeed the top left example where I've got color in the rock. I wouldn't have got the intensity of color in sunshine. So when color is an important ingredient in a photograph, rainy or cloudy days can be very effective, and also wet surfaces are effective as well. You will certainly find that that if you photograph pebbles on a beach, or you've got rocks in front of a waterfall, the intensity of the color will be much stronger when they're wet as opposed to dry. And use a polarizing filter as well, because a polarizing filter will keep the wet look but bring the color intensity out. So it's the one occasion I use a polarizing filter. Generally I don't use them very much, but I certainly use them on wet surfaces, particularly when you're reflecting grey sky on the wet surfaces. It can bring out the colour much more intensely. Generally spring and autumn, but really this time, because of the natural colours of the landscape, but can be any time of year. This is just a few monochrome examples taken on cloudy day, particularly with long exposures as well, because you've got a lot of cloud detail to use with long exposures, so that kind of light can be very effective. Couple more examples. These are quite good comparisons, particularly the top one. It's a location I often take my customers to, just as a bit of a composition test, just at the top of the hill in the Brecon Beacons. Just shows you it's a very wet day, lots of rain coming down. Just a simple comparison between colour and black and white, and it shows that the black and white version brings out the light on the road much more intensely. It's a shiny surfaces, it reflects it reflects the light from the sky, and it comes out with some intensity. And you can use this effect of bright shiny surfaces against dark landscape or cloud very effectively, particularly in black and white. The other one, photograph of a waterfall. Many people have been to this spot, the waterfalls underneath the Bacile in Scotland. Just another example of where you're using flat light just to bring out the contrast in the landscape. Again, works effectively in black and white. Waterfalls, it is probably the one kind of subject that I will typically always photograph on rain or cloudy days. Brings out the colours, and they're often in woodland and surrounded by trees, and the light and shadow effect. I probably should have shown a horrible example taken in a woodland on a bright sunny day here, actually, purely as a contrast. Generally, and it is a generalisation, I would say that by and large don't photograph waterfalls in woodland on a bright sunny day, because one, the bright light off the water, huge contrast problems, huge bright spots, but secondly, and more importantly, the light coming through the trees creates a real mix of light and shadow effect, which certainly, particularly when the sun's behind you, makes it virtually impossible to deal with. So your waterfall days, if you ever got a rain or even a flat light, even when the sky itself isn't particularly interesting, and you're looking for waterfalls as a subject, that kind of day is the day to do it. Mist and fog. I've mentioned this before, I love mist and fog because it simplifies compositions, it obscures details. I've chosen these 5 because they all have a different colouring, and depending on the precise time that you take the picture or the specific weather that you take the picture in, then the colouring will change from what we call the blue owl, the one with the church on the top right, to a reddish look, the picture in the centre, to turns more orange as the sun comes up. And the one on the bottom, I've shown you that one before, St Paul's, is taken in fog, so that's grey, of course, that's completely different. But it's quite interesting to see the different colour effects that different times of day and precisely different weather can have. But mist and fog are great because they do simplify compositions and simplify an obscure detail and just produce very strong outlines. Typically I'll be shooting against the light, and again, typically these will more often be taken in high pressure systems in settled weather where you've got still air and mist or fog forms during the night, particularly towards dawn. These are again taken in mist and fog, but a more scenic style of picture. So if your style of photography is more scenic rather than a more abstract effect like these, then equally good. So again, all these are taken on pretty much a settled day. Usually in this kind of shot, half an hour later, the light is pretty useless. The mist will rise, it will usually turn into haze, and that'll be pretty much for photography, usually for landscape photography, that's it for the day. So do be up there at dawn. Can often be, particularly when the rain has passed, and I'll come back into that for a second. But so in this situation, be prepared to get out and get out at dawn. If you go an hour later, typically it'll be too late. Frost. This is a little bit more about frost in a minute. The one to look for particularly is what we call air frost. Which basically settles on surfaces, and this is what generates the interest. Frost is a particular kind of weather I go for as well. This kind of frost forms after very cold nights, typically in the middle of winter, with a lot of moisture in the air. Again, I'll mention a little bit more about that in a minute. A few examples of snow. Quite a wide variety, from the more abstract kind of shot to one with foreground looking towards the castle, to more general scenic photographs. Snow, I mean, I'm sure you've all got snow landscape photographs, and because it's just an incredibly appealing subject. A few things about snow: remember to expose more than the camera wants, because typically the camera will underexpose by a couple of stops because it wants to turn the snow grey. Secondly, in sunshine under blue skies, the shadows in snowy landscapes go very, very blue. So I always reduce the color saturation of the blue in post-processing. It can be severely blue, just something to be mindful of when the sun's up in the sky. It doesn't apply, as in the bottom example, when the sun is low on the ground, because under a grey sky, what it's doing is effectively reflecting the blue sky in the shadows. So something to be mindful of. Rainbows, not my favourite subject in truth, but I've got a few examples here in any case. Main reason is that the sun's always behind you, and it's my least favourite light direction. So they have an appeal as subjects themselves. Make sure they add to the composition. Good example being this rainbow over the tower. And generally, a shot which is just a picture of a rainbow as itself tends not to work. As I mentioned, the sun will always be behind you. Typically, a rainbow will be occurring as the clouds are moving away from you. So basically, as the clouds are passing, the sun comes out from behind the clouds, and you get the rainbow with the clouds that have been over you so the rain typically will have passed, are in the other direction. As with many of the other situations, this will typically be in showery or rainy weather, sunshine and showers, kind of weather we've been having earlier in the week. Oh, one other additional thing, the angle of the arc, it's worth bearing in mind. It's related to how high the sun is in the sky. So the one where you've got a low arc, the sun's high in the sky. Where you've got a high arc, it's low in the sky, so it has an inverse effect. Wind. Wind produces a lot of movement. I've got a few examples here. So if you want big waves, big high waves, in South Wales, the most popular spot is Porthcawl Lighthouse. There you find photographers queuing up there. Sand. I probably won't repeat that. I think I've mentioned with my sandstorm experience before, damaged quite a lot of equipment, so be very careful of it. And cloud movement as well. So long exposure photography, effectively wind creating cloud movement. With a strong wind, you can get something in about 30 seconds. That one on the bottom right is only about 30 seconds. Very strong wind, clouds move incredibly quickly. Wind is a consequence of a low pressure weather system, but as I say, rapidly changing conditions. Under clear skies, high pressure weather system, backlighting. Use this quite a lot, and it's a very good way of getting interesting photographs from clear sky conditions. The two examples at the bottom, the sun is a point of light, point the sky towards the sun, use a small aperture, and it creates that effect. You will need a neutral graduated filter for those kind of images as well. Keeping my eye on the watch, I think. Finally, and hopefully this will answer the question that Jay gave me earlier, particular weather forecasts to look out for and that I tend to look out for. When your forecast says, when you look at the weather forecaster and they say there's going to be rain overnight, but it's clearing towards dawn, leading to sunshine and showers from the start. Generally, you've got a passing front, and you've got heavy showers following quickly on behind. Then this will produce quite dramatic light. So it is the time you need to be prepared, often prepared to go out early. Often when you start, it's going to be dark outside and it's going to be raining, depending obviously how far you have to travel. Two things to bear in mind: how far you have to drive to get to your spot. Secondly, how far you have to go from the car to get to your spot, all of which need to be taken into account if you're going to get there in time. And it's really easy to get there too late, because the tendency is to think it's raining outside, therefore I'm not going to go because it's pouring down with rain. And often in this kind of weather it is absolutely pouring down with rain. But if you follow a forecast, and forecasts have got much more accurate, follow a forecast and it says the sun will clear from dawn or early, then that's the time to go out, and that's the kind of situation in which you'll get this kind of effect. So it is typically the kind of light I will go out for. This time of year is absolutely fantastic for it. Late evening light. What can often happen, particularly when you've got showery rain, not frontal, although it can happen with frontal rain, but showery rain, showers form during the day. As the temperature, the air is unstable within a low pressure weather system in showery weather. Warm air rises from the landscape, condenses as it goes to a higher altitude. The condensed air form clouds, the clouds deposit rain. That's why you'll find typically in this kind of weather it'll be showery inland, go towards the coast, and it'll generally be much more settled and often with blue skies. So you'll find typically this kind of weather develops inland. But what happens late in the evening is that as it cools again, the clouds evaporate, and very often you'll find the clouds begin to break and suddenly the sun will come out. Again, at this time of year in spring, the light can be fantastic in this kind of situation. So it's something to remember. So keep an eye on the forecast. If the forecast says showers building during the day but clearing towards dusk, then you try and get out with your camera. This one, rain again overnight, but perhaps we've got a passing front, and you often find this, the rain's clearing during the night and leading to clear skies. The rain has caused damp atmosphere. Damp atmosphere will cause mist or fog to form as the air condenses on moist ground as the temperature drops, and that will lead to either mist forming or can be a cloud inversion as well. So a cloud inversion is when effectively you're at ground level, you're in fog, but get above it and high enough up where the temperature can be actually warmer, because the cold air drops into the valleys and condenses into fog. Higher up, and you're looking down on it, and the air's warmer. Within this situation, you'll often find you have to be there very early, because that, as the temperature rises, as the sun comes up, then that mist or fog rises very, very quickly, and often within even 10 minutes you'll find it begins to rise. So you do need to be ready, you need to be prepared in time. But typically this will often happen when you've got rain passing through, the pressure rising behind after a front's passed, and therefore you've still got a lot of moisture in the air, but you've got high pressure. That one generally will lead to fog. Time of year comes into it as well, of course. Hard frost, as I mentioned earlier, where you've got a frosty landscape. It's the air frost you're looking for. It's the kind of frost that deposits on surfaces, on vegetation, not so much a ground frost. Ground frost typically won't want to do, it's a bit of a misnomer actually. Ground frost doesn't tend to do this. It's the hard frost when you've got very temperatures well below zero that can produce this kind of effect. So when the forecast says look for the words hard frost or hoar frost or air frost, that's what they mean. So look out for those when you hear where the forecaster use those terms. Clear still mornings, I cover this slightly, but it's worth repeating. When you've got, again at this time of year, autumn is very good for it, winter and spring are very good for it. When you've got clear still mornings, great for reflections, mist will often form, there's no wind, so you've got high pressure weather systems and still air tends to produce this effect. As with all weather system this type, you have to be there early. Half an hour later, generally this kind of weather leads to very hazy flat light. So it's look forward to getting out there early, but be prepared to be out there for maybe an hour or so, and then I would usually not. You'll normally find this kind of weather leads to a clear hazy day. Yeah, you've got to time it right. Right, oh, we've come to the end. Got a few, that's actually not bad timing, a few things to look out for. So when you're looking at something in perhaps a week or two, have an idea of what weather forecast you're looking for. Is the forecast over the next few days, and as I said earlier, forecasts have got much more accurate in recent years, particularly long-term weather forecasts, is generally the pattern to rise or fall. Now this week's been a really good example where it started off unsettled weather, sunshine and showers, some very heavy showers up till yesterday, but it settled down. The light's gone much flatter, and that's what's forecast for the next few days. So I'd be less inclined probably to go out with a camera than I certainly would have been a few days ago. So worthwhile bearing in mind if you're planning a photographic shoot for a particular purpose, what kind of weather is coming up. Practicalities like if you're looking at a particular location, position of sunrise and sunset at particular times of year, that changes obviously as the arc of the sun changes. What might be an appropriate kind of sun position in one time of year won't necessarily be at another time of year. I mentioned the 7 bridges earlier on. That's quite a good example. You've got to be quite specific with those. Worthwhile referencing pictures that you've taken from previous years. What have you got on your files that will give you a clue or a reminder of to what kind of weather you're going to face? Look at the weather forecasts. The 3 I tend to look at, Met Office, BBC and MetCheck, in various details. I'll typically, because I do a lot of mountain landscape photography, be particularly looking at the specific mountain landscape weather forecasts. And don't be too specific. Don't get too hung up on it, because as I think I've probably shown you here, there's a huge variety of different weathers. Unless you're looking at hazy weather in summer, which really, or perhaps grey skies are either summer or winter, flat grey, then I wouldn't tend to go out in those, it's true. But there's so many different other kind of weathers, particularly in clear light, that you can make use of. If you're planning on going out the following day, so check on what the weather forecast is likely to be. There are a lot of webcams around at the moment, and a lot of places throughout the UK have got webcams that will give you, obviously, if it's current, it's a bit late, but it'll give you an idea of how the weather is looking in that kind of situation. I use webcams quite a lot. Do look at the dawn morning forecast the following day, and do look for updates up until the following evening, basically as to make a decision whether you're going to go out or not. The weather forecast gets more specific as it gets towards it. You'll find that the 2 or 3 day forecasts tend to talk in generalities of AM and PM, but they get more specific hour by hour as you get down towards the day after. So do keep an eye on the weather. the wind speed, the weather type, the wind speed and direction of the wind, all these kind of things are relevant. I've also made a point because it's relevant. It's not so much about the weather, but it's certainly a condition. Tide times for coastal photography is very important. If it's local, if your destination is local, you can pretty much decide impromptu and decide pretty much on spec. If it's a bit of a, if you're planning on driving quite a distance to get to your location, probably does need to give it a bit more thought. We all have wasted journeys, but try and minimize the chance you'll have of a wasted journey, and do arrive in plenty of time, particularly if you're looking at pre-dawn light. It's really easy to get to a location too late. I've done it myself plenty of times. A few tips. Get to learn basic meteorology. Do get into the habit of checking weather forecasts regularly and find out and see what the effects of different types of weather and weather systems have on your images. Use what information is available. There's plenty of those you can upload. You don't upload or download onto your phone, I can't remember. And of course, as I always say, if you want to find out more, come on one of my workshops, and here is my contact details. So Jay, back to you.
Brilliant. Once again, Nigel, another jam-packed hour and loads of praise and thank you already. So thank you for that. Before we get into the questions, obviously, as Nigel said, and actually a few people have asked how they get in touch with Nigel, creativephotography.wales.com. There's Nigel's email address, nigel@creativephotography.wales.com.
Yeah, jot it down quickly before it disappears.
Well, I've sent it all to them via I've sent it all to them via the chat panel, and you'll all be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow with all of Nigel's contact information on there. But Creative Photography Wales, his phone number's on there, his email's on there. That's where you get in touch with him. Worst case scenario, if you've forgotten it, get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with Nigel. No problems whatsoever. Nigel, not particular order, but what I've done is I've hung on to the generic ones. We've obviously had some new faces with us tonight, which is always good, but a few questions that obviously we've tackled in the past, but obviously we will always tackle them again. But only a few to get through, so not in any particular order. You've mentioned a couple of times tonight, actually brought them up, you mentioned a few times tonight where you might use a filter, and I know you mentioned the polarizing filter for certain times of year.
Sure.
We had a general question straight off the bat, what are your feelings about filters, and then followed on, which filters do you use? So I guess it's a two-parter for you there.
Okay. Filters almost need a webinar in themselves, actually, to be honest with you. But I would summarize it as saying the only filters I ever use are those that control the quantity and quality of light. So they're all neutral filters. They have no color balance and they have no special effects. They simply control light. So you have a neutral density filter, which reduces the amount of light coming through the lens, which allows you to use longer shutter speeds, or perhaps larger apertures. Primarily longer shutter speeds, I would say, typically. You also have neutral graduated filters that balance exposure between bright parts of the picture, typically but not always the sky, and the dark parts of the picture, typically but not always the foreground, because the sky will be typically much brighter than the foreground, particularly when you're shooting against the light, and hopefully you'll get those examples, you can see from my examples I've shown you, I am very frequently shooting against the light. So I wouldn't say that a neutral graduated filter is permanently on the front of my camera, but I would say it's probably there 75% of the time because of the light direction I'm using and that ability to handle contrast. The final one is a polarizing filter where you effectively reduce glare or reflections of reflective surfaces when you don't want them. But I would emphasize the only filters you should ever buy are the neutral ones that control light and its quantity or quality. Never buy a special effector filter, never buy colored filters. They are a complete waste of money, and in my mind the filter manufacturers, sorry Nissi, sorry Lee and all the others, if you sell these things, you shouldn't be selling them because nobody should ever buy these things. And
Great.
People do.
staying on the filter side, and I think you kind of just covered it, but I just wanted to be sure. So somebody's asked specifically about a snow scene. Would you probably find that in snow and the reflection you would be using maybe a neutral density filter, and of what kind of level do you think?
Uh, there isn't a particular necessity to use a neutral density filter in snow specifically. It is bright, but the camera will always have another shutter speed you can use. The relevant question in snow is about the exposure because of the way the cameras read grey. The snow is bright white, the camera will want to turn it grey. So to get the exposure accurate, you'll need to give it approximately 2 stops, often more, if you've got sunshine shining off it, than the camera is reading. Because if you follow the camera's meter, it will record the snow grey and your snow is white. It's not, you shouldn't need a neutral density filter. Most cameras have got shutter speeds that go up to a 4,000th of a second. So in terms of the controls you're able to use, that shouldn't be an issue. But it is about exposure control.
Excellent. Typically for shooting, what kind of white balance do you favour, and do you ever use auto white balance?
Yeah, I do most of the time actually. There are exceptions. Panoramic photo merges, I will use a fixed white balance because when you're merging, the white balance can shift slightly as you're panning across, so I will fix the white balance. But most situations, single shots, I use auto white balance. The camera does, on the whole, do a good job of it. There are a couple of exceptions. In woodlands, they can go slightly wrong. Woodlands actually is probably the main example. Woodlands and shadows they can do. But the fact is, it's the easiest thing to correct in post-processing. Simply use the auto white balance tool and click on a neutral, a grey or a white or a black, and in post-processing it will automatically correct to, it will neutralize the white balance. So if you do get it wrong, don't worry about it. It's the easiest thing to correct in post-processing. There was something I was going to else. Yeah, night exposures as well. You'll typically find that with night exposures, tungsten or what they call incandescent white balance tends to produce the closest effect. But as I mentioned, there's nothing else. There's nothing that you can't do in post-processing.
Excellent. A couple of people actually asked right back at the beginning when we were looking at reading the weather as opposed to the photography. So you were showing the sort of weather diagrams. And anywhere off the top of your head, Nigel, where people can learn how to read this better? Any websites or books that you can think of how to understand the meteorological side of it a bit better? A few people did ask.
No. Do you mean specifically relating to photographers?
No, I think about generally reading the weather signs, but I guess there's nothing you can't really Google, I'm sure. If you
Not really. In truth, I honestly, I haven't got anything off the top of my head, but I mean, there's plenty of information on meteorology there. It just takes a bit of Googling, really.
Yeah, I think
I mean, if you get a bit more specific, weather for photographers or something like that, I'm sure you'll come up with something a little bit more precise. But there's I honestly haven't got a reference point that I use. Much of what I know I've learned over the years and I've used and applied through experience.
Actually, somebody's very kindly just popped up, which is great. nationalgeographic.com/the photography photo tips, photographing the weather. So there we go. National Geographic. What a great place to check out.
That sounds great to me. I will try it myself. I haven't looked at it on myself.
Brilliant. But yeah, sure. Nothing. I'm sure that you can't. I'm sure that you can't Google. And find out the answers that you need there. Again, a couple of questions that we've definitely heard but had before, Nigel, but we'll answer them very quickly. As a whole, are you shooting on tripod, or are you happy to shoot handheld in landscape photography?
My answer to that is what I always answer to that question. If I can get the aperture and shutter speed, the camera settings that I want to get a sharp picture handheld, I will shoot handheld because it's much quicker, it's much more flexible in terms of camera position, in terms of timing. Now, the particular example where this is particularly important when you're shooting panoramic photo emerges in rapidly changing light. Now there's a good example on that slide, the question slide you've got in front of you, that one backlit in the bottom right hand corner. I didn't have time to set a tripod up. The light happens, and one happens quickly, but two changes quickly. So you need to have consistent light. I can't have part of that picture in light and part of it in shadow, because by the time the sun moves, I've taken the last shot. Sorry, by the time I've taken the last shot, the sun moves, I beg your pardon. So I will be able to operate and work that picture much more quickly if handheld. And you're usually, if you're shooting against the light, that bright light, you're usually able to use pretty fast shutter speeds. Typically, the setting for that shot at 100 ISO will be around 100 to 160th of a second in f13. It's that kind of level of light. So particularly if you're using a wide-angle lens or a standard length lens, that is plenty to get a sharp shot.
Brilliant. Last couple then, Bud. Usual one, favourite choices for lenses for landscape photography?
Yeah, I think another thing I always reply is I think it's my 16 to 35 lens, and I've just bought myself a little Fuji, which has got a 10 to 24 lens with it. It's a cropped Fuji, it's a mirrorless camera. So those are, but with my Nikon it's 16-35. Canon do the same focal length, and so that's the one. It will be my, I think the expression is go-to lens probably.
Brilliant. In your opinion, do you always have the water in motion, or should you be the person photographing the image? Or should it be up to the person photographing the image, sorry?
It is absolutely up to the person photographing the image. I've got I think I gave you it's on a different presentation, an example where you've got static waves frozen in time and you've got movement. As a generality, and it really is a generality, waterfalls, water movement, I will use a longer exposure. The frozen water effect on waterfalls, on the whole, I don't find particularly pleasant. Oh, can you bring that last slide back, Jay? You had a question slide up on the screen, which has now disappeared from my screen. Has it disappeared from everybody else's? Because I was going to refer to one of the pictures on it. Jay, you still there?
Sorry, Nigel. Yes, no, the image is still on screen on my end, and the audience can still see it.
It's gone off mine. Okay. Yeah. And more often than not, within seascapes, I will freeze the waves because I like waves to have structure. More of my images are stronger with when the waves have got structure than if I use movement. But equally, I've got examples where they've got movement. The one example on the screen that everyone else can see, but apart from me, is actually about a third or quarter of a second, where you've got some movement, but it's not. So it evokes movement, but it's not frozen in time. So it's one halfway between the two. It is very much the effect you want from the image that's important.
Brilliant. And as you said, we have actually got an entire or a big section of one of the previous webinars that was dedicated to photographing water. So you'll be able to find that on the Photographer Academy there. Nigel, last question. Any tips on capturing rain in your photographs?
Capturing rain, do you mean keeping it off the camera or actually capturing it literally? I don't think I can think of examples where I've actually used captured raindrops. I've taken a few on leaves, but actually rain as part of the image when you've had rain coming down. I've not really used it, in truth. I can't think of any image examples that I've actually used it. I've seen it done.
I think that was the question, but obviously, like I said, I've never seen it featured in any of your photographs that we've ever shown.
No, I've not got any examples of it, and I know people who have. I've seen them when they've actually used the rain effect. It's not something I've really done.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, that's the last of the questions, but somebody also just said that if you go to the metoffice.gov then you will find a whole section about learning how to read the weather and weather charts. So there we go, National Geographic.
Yeah.
National...
There's plenty of information
Excellent.
on Met Optics, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nigel, once again then, thank you so much for tonight. Loads of thanks and praise in the question panel.
My
For
pleasure.
another incredibly informative webinar. Please guys, don't forget that obviously, if you're interested in going along to any of Nigel's workshops and find out what's got to go on, Creative Photography Wales, please don't hesitate to drop him a line, and obviously he'll give you all the information that's available on there. And he's about to shoot some new films on the Heritage Coast and urban landscapes for us as well, as what we've been discussing, isn't it, pal? So
it is.
excellent. So thank you all for joining us tonight, guys.